Kia ora, and welcome back to the Happy Saver podcast. I'm Ruth, tuning in from beautiful Aotearoa, New Zealand. Now, in each episode, I get to dig into the money story of just an everyday Kiwi, and I share them with you in my own words. Now, I've interviewed real people figuring out their finances in their own way, and I just love turning their experience into something that you can learn from. Why do I keep making this podcast? Because hearing how others handle their money is such a simple, powerful way to spark ideas for your own financial life. So take the bits that work for you, leave the rest, and build something that feels right for you and your whānau. So thanks for hanging out with me today, whether you're on your commute, you're out for a walk or a run, or doing jobs around the house. So righto, that's enough from me. Let's get straight into it. Today's kōrero began with just a small act of generosity. Maria sent me $20 through my Buy Me a Coffee link to encourage me to keep up the good work. In her note, she explained that she and her partner were late financial bloomers, only really getting started in their 50s. Now in their 70s, they've paid off their mortgage and student loan, invested in the share market, and built up $1 million in savings and investments. Plus, they also receive New Zealand super and a US pension. She told me that knowledge is power and that my blog has provided useful, important information that's helped them along the way. Well, you better believe that this got my attention, and I wrote back, and I soon learned that through working hard, investing as much of their income as they possibly could, and carefully tracking and measuring their progress, Maria and her partner had gone from feeling anxious about retirement to completely calm about it. And that kicked off a lovely back and forth where Maria shared that, for her, money had always meant security, yet for a variety of reasons, she kept making poor financial decisions throughout much of her adult life. She knew what to do to save, invest, and be sensible, but never quite managed to pull it all together. Moving from the US to New Zealand at the age of 50, however, it felt like pressing a giant reset button. She'd always invested in her education, and she brought that knowledge with her. Soon after, she met her partner, who was equally qualified, but also late to the financial party. Together, they realised they were well set up to succeed if they put in the effort. And so they did. So today I'm sharing the story of Maria, which is not her real name, who speaks on behalf of herself and her partner, Michelle. They're a textbook example of starting right where you are, no matter your age. And I have to say, this was one of the most enjoyable conversations I've had in a long time. But you know how this goes. Before I really dig into things, let me tell you just a little bit about today's fabulous sponsor. I'm a massive fan of creating multiple sources of income because I believe it makes you more financially resilient. However, you need to be sure that extra hours spent working on a side hustle translate into actual money in your pocket. PocketSmith helps manage secondary income from a side hustle by integrating various financial accounts, providing customizable budgeting and cash flow forecasts, and offering a detailed dashboard unique to each side hustle for transaction management and net worth tracking. If you want to supercharge your finances with PocketSmith, have we got a deal for you? Happy Saver listeners get a whopping 50% off your first 2 months of PocketSmith's foundation plan. To get your deal, go to pocketsmith.com/the Happy Saver. That's pocketsmith.com/the Happy Saver. To say that Maria went out on a limb to speak with me is an understatement. For a start, she had never even listened to my podcast, so didn't quite know what to expect. And it was not until the very end of our conversation that she revealed that she is typically a bit of an introvert. But to have the opportunity to talk with someone like myself, who likes talking about money and who knows what I'm talking about, well, she said she couldn't turn herself down, and I felt really honoured to be given a glimpse into her life. She said that we're all trying to get to the same place, financial security, so it's nice to be able to pitch in with ideas because she, like you and I, is always curious about how other people do money. Now, Maria was born in Washington, D.C. in 1954 to parents who had grown up between the wars. Her mother was from Salzburg and her father was in the US Army. They met, they married, and they settled in Washington in 1948, giving Maria an all-American childhood with a distinctly European influence. Money in her family was handled carefully. Everything was paid in cash, and her mother managed the household finances with precision. While money wasn't openly discussed, Maria and her older sister absorbed the lessons. Work hard, get a good job, and be sensible with what you earn. The family was comfortably middle class, living in a diverse suburban neighbourhood filled with immigrant families. They took holidays and enjoyed a secure, typical 1950s, 1960s upbringing. Her parents often said, "Don't talk about money," a rule Maria is delighted to break today. Her mother's message was always clear: get a secure job and hold on to it, shaping Maria's lifelong view that money equals security. Now, Maria's mother insisted she learn typing, a skill that landed her a summer job at the Defence Mapping Agency after passing her civil service test at just 16. She earned $750 US, which is about $6,000 in today's money, an enormous sum at the time, and she recalls her mother as being so proud and pleased. Now, she was supposed to save this money. Instead, she bought a motorcycle because her and her friend thought it would be cool to have the same bike, much to her mother's fury. Apparently, they didn't speak for a month. Now, after realising office work, although it paid well, wasn't for her, Maria took jobs at gas stations, pumping gas, changing tyres, and carrying out oil changes, one of the few women doing so in the mid-1970s, and she loved it. All through her 4 years at university, where she got a bachelor's degree in physical geography, she lived at home for free, her parents paid for her tuition, and she worked at various service stations to earn her spending money, even turning down a full-time job offer there to keep her mother happy. Now, after graduating at the age of just 21, she landed a job with a huge consulting firm on a really large government project alongside 100 other new graduates. It came with benefits and health insurance. It was kind of like a real job, she said. And during the 6 years she worked there, she moved up to manage a small team. But the work was still all office-based, and after 6 years, Maria realised she just didn't enjoy it anymore. Now, a major influence in the decisions she made throughout life about work came from her father. She remembered that he absolutely hated his government job, and she recalled moments of him being very unhappy. And because of this, Maria vowed never to stay in a job that she didn't like. But that mindset led to frequent career changes, gaps in her CV, lots of new beginnings, and never getting ahead financially as she followed her many and varied interests. She could never quite settle, taking on jobs and quitting them when her interest waned, rather than following a single career path which felt freeing at first, but less ideal by the time she reached 50. So she might have bounced around, but I could see she also looked ahead for opportunities. Seeing technology on the rise and computers up and coming, where she went back into education and retrained in electronics technology in 1979, and then she landed a job with Wang Laboratories, which was a major company at the forefront of computing technology at that time. And she said she loved it, and it remains one of her favourite roles. They even gave her shares in the company as part of her salary package, which she took because she really believed in the company and where it was headed. Now, a quick Wikipedia search told me that they were founded in 1951. They peaked in the 1980s with annual revenues of US $3 billion and employed over 33,000 people. But the founder died in 1990, and the end came swiftly when Wang filed for bankruptcy in 1992. By that point, Maria's stocks were worthless, and there is a lesson here about the risk of holding a single company share or stock. I'd never heard of Wang Laboratories, but in their day, they were the equivalent of Apple, Google, Nvidia, and all the top companies that are household names today. But none of them last. They grow and they die, which is why buying single stocks or the shares of the company who pays your wages is so risky. How do you know who is on the way up and who is on the way out? You need to know when the perfect time to sell them is, and that is really hard to do. So the simple answer is to just buy all of the companies via an ETF or index fund. While at Wang, Maria met a partner that she stayed with for 10 years, and while she had a lovable, larger-than-life personality, she came to find that she was terrible with money. She avoided paying taxes, ignored debts, and created constant financial stress for herself and, by association, Maria. But despite these red flags, in 1985, when Maria was in her early 30s, they bought a house together. Maria really wanted to buy a home. She wanted the security that she felt would come from doing so. But in order to get a mortgage, the bank insisted that her partner pay off her student loan first. Her partner dominated the financial landscape, and they had a huge argument over her student loans, but she refused to budge. So Maria said that in order to get what she wanted, which was a home, she caved in and paid her student loan off for her. Now, unfortunately, this is a common dynamic. One person is arrogant enough to bully the other into submission because they so strongly believe they are right. And over time, it becomes easier to submit than argue your own point. The financial power imbalance tips more and more in one person's favour, and without finding their way back to a common ground, marriages often end. I think there will be a few people listening to this thinking that they are either the bully or the person being submissive. So, what is the solution? You have to talk to your partner about it, because you have to be able to see each other's point of view to go anywhere worth going together. Now, in time, Maria's partner decided that they wanted to leave the area that they lived and worked in, and she convinced Maria to quit the job that she loved and sell up and move. 40 years later, she still kicks herself for leaving, because that kicked off a period of working a series of varied jobs, never making much money, never staying in a job for long, and never saving money either. She found herself living with someone who just wanted to spend it, spend it, spend it. And in the 1980s, she recalls lining up at the bank on a Friday night to withdraw your wages as cash, and it was all gone by the time Friday rolled around again. Living pay to pay is a universal concept. There was no money left over, which is why a key lesson she wanted to share, one that took her a while to learn, is that you have to save and invest first, and then spend what is left after saving and investing. After selling their house that they owned for just 2 to 3 years, they made a little bit of money and moved east of Washington to Delaware. But there were capital gains taxes to pay from the sale, and she had a partner who didn't want to pay taxes. So the way out of this was to buy a bigger, more expensive house worth about $30,000 more than the one that they'd just sold. They legally avoided taxes, but the trade-off was that they now had a bigger mortgage. Maria returned to a 4-year stint of study, which included some paid teaching at the university, and her partner worked full-time, and they battled on until finally in 1994, aged about 40, and after about a decade together, that relationship ended. They sold the house, each coming out with $20,000. In today's Kiwi dollars, that's about $58,000, a sum Maria described as pathetic, given the years that had passed. Why so low? Well, she said that they didn't own either house long enough to pay it down and grow equity, and house prices didn't rise much during that time either. They'd signed up to a 30-year mortgage, but took what Americans call a home equity loan to extend their mortgage to carry out renovations, something Kiwis do all the time too. You pay down a bit of the mortgage or the house goes up in value, so you borrow more against your home. But when it comes to selling, once you've paid off the mortgage, you often come out with very little cash. Finally, in 1995, aged 41, she earned her master's degree in physical geography with climatology. Now single, she got a proper job with a government agency, she said, with benefits and a good salary. She rented an apartment and finally started to save some money, and started investing some too via her company retirement scheme, even though she wouldn't be able to access it until she turned 65, an age that still felt so far away. Fortunately for Maria, since the 1980s, her mother had taken an interest in investing to grow wealth. New financial products such as mutual funds that these days we take for granted were starting to become available in America, meaning that you no longer had to buy and sell single stocks. So Maria followed her mother's lead. And later, in 1995, Maria met someone new, a Kiwi who was at the same university as her. They became a couple, but lived separately, and also kept their money separate because this was Maria's chance to work hard at her job, save, and get ahead by adding to her retirement accounts. For a time, she had focus. But Maria said that she never had a problem getting a job, it was keeping it that was the challenge. And she found herself working for a guy who was a bit of a lunatic and would pick someone to yell at each day. And when it was her turn, well, that just didn't work for Maria. So, in a panic, she quit. It was fight him back or flee. So she took off. Without regular contributions, her retirement accounts stagnated and growth naturally slowed. Despite her extensive tertiary education, which could lead to a well-paid career, her interest now lay in learning how to do home renovations. Quite the pivot, and she went to work in a home renovation business. It was enjoyable, but not well paid. So, to cover the shortfall between income and expenditure, she spent her cash savings. She really enjoyed the work and she was having a good time, and when her Kiwi partner of 4 years got a job in the Deep South, in what she called the buckle of the Bible Belt of America, and certainly not known for their progressive worldview, Maria chucked in her job and moved there too. With no job to go to herself, Maria volunteered for Habitat for Humanity, and it was there that she met an older guy who had his own home reno business and who became a real DIY mentor to Maria. And they ended up working together for 3 years, and she loved it, and she learned so much. And she made good money too, about $80,000 gross in today's Kiwi dollars. And she and her Kiwi partner bought a house together as well. Although a completely different personality to her previous partner, there was one thing that they had in common: spending. When Kiwis make the effort to move overseas, well, we like to make the most of it, and her partner loved to spend money on travel and vacationing, including, of course, a trip home to New Zealand with Maria. So, once again, saving and investing took a back seat for Maria, and by now, to cover her gaps in income over the years, she had ended up spending all of her savings, plus all the money she had invested that was able to be cashed out. She was back to having a house, but no money invested all over again. I was having a coffee with a friend recently, actually, and we talked about how common it is for people to not only spend saved money, but also cash out investments and spend that too. And when I speak with people, there is always a very valid reason or excuse for selling some shares, ETF or index fund that they own. But the end result is always that they've sold the golden goose. That, had they left it alone and added money to it, would have, in time, provided them with the income that they needed. And this is why a KiwiSaver fund is so important to New Zealanders. With a few exceptions, you can't cash it out. In about 2003, and now in her late 40s, an opportunity came up to work for a state climate centre as an instrument technician, a role that pulled all of Maria's skills nicely together. And although it didn't pay highly, it was a great job, which also meant that she could travel. She also picked up similar work at a university that was close by. Life was settled and interesting during this period, but she continued to spend all that she earned. But her partner got itchy feet. She was homesick for Aotearoa, and I can't blame her. So that is how Maria came to move here. Doing so was a huge decision, because as a couple, 10 years into their relationship, things had become shaky, but perhaps by moving back home, things might settle again. Her job at the climate centre was ending as it was being relocated to a different city, and she doubted her ability to find another good role in the US in their current location. And lacking confidence and fearing she'd fall behind if she stayed out of the workforce too long, she decided to make the move to the other side of the world, though she is still not entirely sure how she mustered the courage to do it. And it took time, but they both found good jobs in Dunedin before leaving America. So with those secured in 2004, aged 50, she moved here, which blows my mind. The contrast must have been stark, so I had to ask what she made of it. Well, she said she was a city girl through and through, so it was a big change, but it was also absolutely beautiful. Now, getting a job prior to arriving was pivotal. I've interviewed a number of well-qualified people who have arrived in New Zealand and struggled to find work. So, by staying employed in the US while she found a good job here, helped make the transition easier. But the work scene was quite different. Her role eventually saw her working as an air quality scientist, but she found herself as the only foreigner in a very conservative and male-dominated environment. She said it felt a little like going back to the 1950s. But being 50 and menopausal, I suspect that she wouldn't have suffered any falls by this age and stage of life. Throw the language barrier into the mix and life was a lot, she said. And yes, everyone was speaking English, but wrapping her head around the Kiwi accent took some doing, she said. And chuck in driving on the other side of the road and having to learn the metric system, well, adjusting to New Zealand took time. In 2005, they bought their own home. They had to because they had a shipping container full of all their worldly possessions on its way. Now, buying a home here was a stressful experience, as they both tried to learn what to do. She described the real estate buying experience in New Zealand as one big secret. The real estate agent is not working for you. You have no idea what a house is worth because no one will tell you, so you have no idea what to offer. Letting the market decide is basically just every buyer throwing in their best guess, and there were a lot of crappy houses on the market, she said, and when they finally found the one that they deemed acceptable, well, they both decided they just had to get it. So, due to all the stress of it and the let the market decide sales pitch, it was only after their offer was accepted in all of 60 seconds that they realised they had wildly overpaid for their home, she said. But, sadly, within a year, Maria and her partner separated. They split the proceeds for the house sale, and she now had 60,000 New Zealand dollars cash to her name. And now, at the age of 51, Maria was again on her own. So she rented a place to live and thought, what the heck will I do now? There had been just too much change, and she was struggling to take it all in. She decided that she just needed to go to work and settle her life right down and hold off making any decisions for a good 6 months. This is an excellent strategy to pause and analyse the situation. Critically, she reflected on her 51 years and what got her to this point, and decided that her life of constant change and upheaval, changing relationships, not much money, and now moving to the bottom of the world, was just not working for her. This pattern needed changing. It was, she said, in quite the understatement I thought, a little scary. While some people live a more stable life and they get to 50 and think, screw it, I'm going to throw my life up in the air and see where it settles, Maria had experienced that life, and instead she wanted the opposite. She wanted some stability and she wanted a plan. She decided that she had to keep her job no matter what. No quitting this time. And she said to herself, I'm here, I'm staying, I'm collecting the paycheck, that's it. In 2004, she was earning a good income, about $45,000 a year, which today would be about $95,000 a year. Because these were the days before KiwiSaver, they also offered her the chance to pay into a workplace pension scheme. She paid it little to no attention, but she thinks she invested in a very conservative type of fund. Not that she could recall clearly, given she was just not tuned into it during this time. She took a moment to carry out a bit of a stocktake of her financial situation. She had a full-time income and a job she was determined to stick at. She had some form of workplace pension scheme, but was pretty light on details. There were some retirement funds in the US, which had about $30,000 in them, plus she had the $60,000 cash from the sale of the house sitting in the bank. At this point, she thought she needed to go and get some financial advice. But everything was so different here, and she really had no idea where to go or who to ask, which is how she stumbled in the wrong direction and found the public trust. And they advised her, unsurprisingly, to set up a trust and then go and buy a rental property and put it inside that trust. Her gut instinct, which thankfully she followed, was to say no to that scheme. But she was casting about and looking for information on investing money. Back in the States, not that she'd ever bought or read any, she knew that money books and magazines were plentiful, so off to the bookshop she went. But they had nothing here in New Zealand, nothing at all. Unless you count the books on property investing, that is, and there were a number of those. She learned pretty quickly that in New Zealand it was all about accumulating houses, which was not her thing. She was remembering back to the stock market investing that she was doing in the States, but the investing landscape was so very different here and the information was scarce. During this difficult period of trying to find her way, sometime in 2005, Maria met Michelle, who was a kind and supportive friend when she really needed one, and they remained close, and in 2007, their friendship grew into a relationship, which Maria describes as the best thing that has ever happened to her because finally, Michelle was truly the right person for her. For the first time, she was in a relationship that was stable and secure, and as a result, she settled into her job long-term. And she also settled into a relationship long-term, and they've now been together for almost 20 years. Now, Michelle was not on our call, so Maria told me a little bit about her. She is the youngest of 4 kids, and they grew up in a state house in Canterbury. Family life was dysfunctional with a fair amount of alcohol involved, which never does any good for anyone. Her father worked at the wharf, and when the kids were old enough to look after themselves, Michelle's mother worked in a factory. As a family, they 100% lived paycheck to paycheck. When Michelle went to work herself, she drove a truck for a living, she detailed cars for a dealership, and then became a chef. Maria talked about her fantastic cooking skills, something that she enjoys benefiting from, and her great leadership skills too. And when Michelle was in her 40s, Maria said that she thought to herself, maybe I am smart. I'm going to see if I can find out. So she took herself off to the University of Otago, and after 7 long years of study, she emerged with a PhD in biomedical science. So that answers that question. Yes, she is phenomenally smart. Now, during her study, she worked as a cook, she received a student allowance, plus she took out student loans to cover the shortfall. However, student loans prior to 2006 were not what they are today. Hers incurred interest from the get-go, and if my memory serves me correctly, the interest rate was around 7 to 8%. I too was actually studying at around this time and paid high interest on my loans while I was studying, which is why to this day I am never blasé about student loans. Yes, they are interest-free now, but the government giveth and the government may also taketh away. So for Michelle, her final loan amount was $75,000, and if she didn't start paying it off, it would incur interest of 7 to 8% each year. Now, getting rid of it was a focus, and when they met, Michelle was working full-time in a career well suited to her new qualifications, and her student loan repayments were being deducted, plus more if she could. The automatic payments she made were the key to getting rid of this debt, or any debt. Make it automatic and you know it will get done. Given she had paid off someone else's student loan in the past, I actually asked Maria what her thoughts were about her partner Michelle's student loan debt. Well, she had offered to help her pay it off, but Michelle had flat out refused. She wanted to do it herself. She took out student loans because she genuinely could not afford to cover the cost of her own education. And she felt that given this was taxpayers' money and she used it to get an education, and now that education had got her a well-paying job, well, she felt she had to bite the bullet, act with integrity, and pay it back quickly and in full. Which is in sharp contrast to the emails I frequently receive when I mention paying student loans off from ex-students who just don't see it this way. They see interest-free borrowing as free money, a free education, and if they can possibly avoid paying it back, particularly if they can move overseas and stay out of the reach of the IRD, despite the fact that their loans are now growing at almost 5% interest, that is absolutely what they intend on doing. Personally, Maria prefers Michelle's honest approach because it shows she has integrity, meaning she respects her even more because of her determination to do the right thing and pay it back. Now they were both working full-time, and in 2007 they bought a house together in Dunedin, paying $285,000 with an 8.5% interest rate. Once again, for Maria, it came back around to her needing to live in her own home. To her, it means security. This time around, she had not chewed up her cash savings, meaning she was able to contribute $60,000 to the deposit, meaning that they had a $225,000 mortgage that they both began to pay on. And alongside this, Michelle also kept paying down her student loan. 2007 was an important year because that is when KiwiSaver started. But Maria didn't join, choosing to continue with her workplace scheme instead. I asked what the hold-up was, and she made a very valid observation. She felt that here in New Zealand, things came and they went. Nothing seemed to have much permanence to it. So she thought that KiwiSaver might just be a flash in the pan, so she held off, finally joining in 2013. And she is not wrong, it is still getting tinkered with to this day. When Michelle moved into permanent employment, she also joined UniSaver, her workplace retirement scheme, before being advised by her employer to also join KiwiSaver to get the $1,000 being offered to new sign-ups, which, and to go back to Maria's point about the impermanence of our financial tools, the government has since scrapped. Plus, they have continued to reduce the benefits of the scheme ever since. If not for the guy at work saying, join KiwiSaver, she never would have done it. It's really common for me to hear a trusted person in a workplace that has advised someone to join KiwiSaver or open a savings and investment account. And it's so good to hear that people are looking out for each other in this way. Now, despite having had a few mortgages by now, Maria said that they had chanced upon Carol at the ANZ Bank, an insightful woman who realised that these two had little clue about debt. She signed them up to a 20-year mortgage starting at 8.5% interest and advised them to pay their mortgage payment fortnightly instead of monthly, explaining to them that they would pay less interest over the life of the loan this way. Plus, she encouraged them to save up a lump sum amount as money allowed. And then, when they were due to renegotiate their mortgage at the end of its term, she told them to put down a lump sum amount to knock a chunk off the debt. Had they not taken Carol's advice, they would still be making payments today. Instead, by making additional payments, they paid their home off in just 9 years. Now, recently Maria actually ran the math on this debt, and she calculated that they had saved themselves about $100,000 in interest payments. As it stands, she worked out that they did pay $94,000 in interest on their $225,000 mortgage, which is still pretty ouch. Now, in around 2010, Maria's workplace retirement scheme ended, again backing up her observation that things just end. Employers around the country were transitioning their staff to KiwiSaver instead, and Maria had the option to roll her $30,000 of savings into KiwiSaver or take it out as cash. She took the cash, added it to the extra mortgage payment savings of $28,000 and put it all on their mortgage that year. And they began to feel energized to get rid of the mortgage. And while this is an excellent thing, it is a problem when you liquidate assets meant for retirement because you now have less retirement savings. Ideally, you want to pay off your debts and invest for retirement concurrently. But momentum was starting to build when it came to money, and with their mortgage coming down and the student loan decreasing with the balance owing down to about $30,000, things were turning in their favour. Because they now had a few things going on, Maria felt like it was time to keep track on a quarterly basis of where all the accounts they each had were and where all the money was. And the quarterly report has become a bit of an ongoing joke between the two of them. They had a joint check account for the house. They also had a variety of joint and separate check and savings accounts with different banks, their KiwiSavers and workplace retirement accounts. They had a mortgage debt to pay, and Michelle had her student loan. This focus also brought her attention to the fact that she needed to calculate if she was paying the correct taxes back in the US as well. Now, once this monitoring and tracking started, it continued on, just bringing things to their attention, and it was a huge help to not only see how far they had come, but where they might go next. In 2012, Michelle's student loan was fully paid off, and they marked this occasion with champagne, and she now began to receive a bigger paycheck each month. The quarterly report told them that they now had about $160,000 spread across their various accounts, plus equity in their home. And for the very first time, it showed that their net worth had switched from being negative to positive. The money they had in the bank and investments was more than what they owed on their mortgage. This was a big deal, a big turning point for them both, because Maria knew that had she not been tracking it, she just would not have known. Seeing their numbers is when they really got serious about the future. But by now, Maria was 58 and Michelle was 56, only 7 and 9 years away from the traditional retirement age of 65. After the death of her parents in 2015, Maria received an inheritance of about 60,000 New Zealand dollars, and she quickly decided that it would go straight on their mortgage. To follow American tax law, though, which is incredibly confusing, she was only able to bring this to New Zealand in stages, putting each chunk towards their mortgage as it arrived. And she rightly believes that her parents would have been proud and pleased with the choices that she made with their money. They plugged away, paying down debt, saving and investing, and by mid-2015, aged 61 and 59, they had paid their $225,000 mortgage off in full. Job done, and they felt darn good, she said. Carol from the ANZ had retired by then, but had she known, I reckon she would have been proud of them. And they celebrated with a delicious cheese platter and a good champagne. Now they had money to spare, and their instinct was to save, not spend, and Maria increased her efforts to educate herself about investment options in New Zealand. Now just keep in mind that even just 10 years ago, finding a way to invest in New Zealand looked a lot different than it does today. It was harder to be a direct investor, and you were much more likely to invest in managed funds via your bank or buy funds through an investment company or a share broker. The 1987 share market crash still loomed large, not that Maria knew much about it. Finance companies had ripped off thousands of people, and these events explain why investing in housing was huge, and information on anything but that was still obscure for the everyday person. But Maria made tweaks where she could, moving Michelle's retirement funds to a growth account while she tried to find out how to invest in other ways here in Aotearoa. By now they were the classic Kiwis, house rich, and although they now had a few $100,000 spread across an array of bank accounts and retirement accounts, Maria was becoming increasingly aware and nervous that they were getting older, and if they wanted a decent retirement, they needed more money working for them. Having struck out with a public trust, she tracked down a financial advisor in Hamilton that was recommended by a friend, and she told them to track their expenses because up until now, she had been tracking how much was in their accounts, but they had no clue as to what they actually spent or earned. Maria went the tedious route and did it manually by setting up categories and going through bank transactions, but to her credit, she kept it up for several years, working out that their spending is amazingly consistent. The financial advisor also said to take an allowance of cash from the ATM once a week and spend that for coffee and what have you. But when it is gone, so they did that. Now that they no longer had a mortgage to pay, she told them to save that same amount of money in a bank account instead. She warned them that if they don't do this, that money would be frittered away, and they agreed to this without hesitation. She also advised them to each have their own emergency fund bank account with $10,000 in it, which they did. And she told them to get rid of what she called lazy money that they had just sitting in check and savings accounts, pointing out that if it's not needed in the short term and it's not making you any money, you should invest it instead so it can make money for you. So very quickly, they put all these steps in place. And now in their 60s and in their peak earning years, their household income was about $150,000 after tax and KiwiSaver and UniSaver deductions of 10% and 5.5%. And they were now saving a whopping $75,000 per year. They knew that now was the time to pay attention and take advantage of this. While they agreed and implemented the advice of the financial advisor when it came to budgeting and saving, they didn't agree with her investment advice. She suggested that they should be more conservative and had created a complicated portfolio that held 19 different actively managed investment funds with a 40% allocation to growth and 60% to assets that would provide an income. But Maria thought it was just too early to do that, and she figured that she could still invest for growth. They had great discussions, she said, about bonds and emerging markets and property funds and how a little bit of this and a little bit of that all make up a diverse portfolio. And in the end, as much as she liked the financial advisor, it just felt all too much and overly complicated. And she thought, I think that with some more knowledge, I can do this myself. But those doubts lingered. What if she was wrong? She managed the family finances, and making a mistake would rest on her shoulders. It was a lot of responsibility. So she talked to another advisor who seemed to give her another equally confusing and complex, and I'm going to add in there, expensive investment plan. Maria looked it all up and she thought, nope, right, I can do this myself. I'm taking it all over. And since making that decision, she has never looked back. She took the good from all the advice she had received and she let the rest go. Now, who is nodding along with this? Who has wanted to get their money in order and start investing, but quickly decided that they are clueless and are better to ask the professionals, only to be disappointed? Well, I know I did exactly the same, and I think Maria had a better experience than me. I'd spent time learning and planning, but still felt like I couldn't possibly know enough to manage our investments. So I went and saw a financial advisor, only to realize I actually knew more than him. All financial advisors are not created equal, and to this day, finding a decent one is a little bit like finding a needle in a haystack. But just know that if you decide to manage your own investments, it doesn't mean you are going to do things perfectly. There is no perfect way to invest, and you will learn as you go and change and tweak, and that is perfectly okay. By 2018, they had stepped up their saving and investing, and their combined balances were edging up to $500,000. They were both working hard at their jobs, sticking to a budget, and Maria's quarterly report was showing that their efforts were paying off. They were the wealthiest they had ever been, and they just knew that they had to accumulate as much as they could while they were in their peak earning years, because very soon the income would stop. Their retirement funds were in growth funds and were doing well both from their contributions and share market gains. When share markets dropped, they noticed that they always bounced back, and money in the bank was earning interest, whether it be in a check account or in a term deposit. It was all building and growing, and in one sense, they could have carried on with a simple plan. But Maria wanted to do more. She wanted to proactively set them up for retirement. She was looking and looking for a way to just buy directly into a Vanguard fund or an index fund in a really simple and low-fee way. She kept looking and discovered the investment provider Invest Now, which only started in 2017, and this is what she had been looking for. In 2018, a term deposit ended at her bank, and she invested some of this money with Invest Now instead. Then she found Simplicity, another low-fee provider of funds, and she invested some money with them too. Although she was still floundering around as to what to invest in, by 2020, the fact remains that she had managed to invest $160,000 into these two funds, and the balance was performing well and growing. Hello, she said, they were on their way. She had decided that banks are meant for day-to-day banking, not for making money, and investment providers are meant for investments that compound and grow your wealth. And even though she had found some good options now, their products were different to today. She said that they didn't offer Vanguard, and InvestNow didn't have the foundation series that they have today. So she just had to read as much as she could and make the best decisions she could based on the information that she had gleaned over the years. The financial advisor had given her an incoherent strategy, so she correctly figured that she couldn't do worse than that. And in 2019, a colleague at work recommended that she read Rich Enough by Mary Holm and The Barefoot Investor by Scott Pape. And she still goes back to Mary's book and felt so inspired by her "yes, you can do it yourself" message. She encouraged her to be confident, keep it simple, and create a basic plan based on her book. Her key message was to stop thinking about it and just do it. Pick a fund and invest money in it. She talked about retirement planning and the great void of not having a paycheck and working out how you could structure your money to fill that gap. Maria knew what asset allocation she wanted, which was a mix between taking some risk for long-term growth and having some conservative investments too. She just needed the nerve to make it happen. Now, going back to her quarterly report, where all of their investment and bank accounts were clearly listed, she worked out that she could in fact comfortably retire at 65. So, in 2019, she did just that. Michelle was still working and earning enough to not only cover their expenses, contribute to her UniSaver and KiwiSaver, but also invest $30,000 a year. Not too shabby at all, she concluded. She spent considerable time understanding the US Social Security system and how her years spent working in America would give her a monthly income of about 2,800 New Zealand dollars, dependent on the exchange rate. What you get is based on your salary accumulation over time, and she had enough to qualify to receive the lowest amount of $1,672 US dollars, which is inflation adjusted annually. If it were to cease for any reason, because of her time spent working in New Zealand, she would be allowed to receive New Zealand superannuation. These are unanticipated benefits she had not counted on from either country when she moved here. While she worked it all out and they lived on her Social Security and Michelle's income, their investments were compounding away, which felt like some kind of miracle, she said. By 2019, Michelle was still working and thought that she should continue for another 5 years. They had almost $700,000 invested, and they were asking themselves if that was enough. By now, Maria had become extremely interested in tracking their money and was doing a monthly report instead of quarterly. And just like me, she bounced out of bed on the first of each month to track how things were progressing. And it was exciting to do so, she said, as things were tracking along, looking good. But then COVID came along, which put a wrinkle in her plans, but she said that she held her nerve mostly. In early 2020, share markets were dropping, the world was really on edge, but they were still feeling pretty good. But the one thing that made them nervous was not the value of the investments dropping, because by now they knew that it would recover in time, but the fact that they didn't have what they felt was a comfortable level of cash in the bank, and they are aware that cash close at hand is important at a time when share markets are down. They wanted to have enough to pay their bills if Michelle lost her job, or they needed money for some reason. They had a managed fund that she had already been debating closing, so they chose to do it now, taking a little loss by selling when the markets were down and moving $95,000 into cash that they held in the bank. Now, this is a really important lesson here. You need to structure your money for both best and worst case scenarios, and COVID was a really good example of a worst case scenario. And people who invest at all costs, saying, "Why would you keep money in the bank when it should be invested in making money?" will suddenly see why cash in the bank is perfectly okay when a situation like COVID arrives. It comes back to their financial advisor's words of not leaving lazy money in the bank. Get that invested. But being very clear with yourselves about just how much you feel is the right amount to keep in cash. In quite a calm and rational way, Maria and Michelle worked this out. They took advantage of interest savings rates while they were around, and they enjoyed watching and learning how their portfolio weathered the storm while living on Social Security and Michelle's income. But by 2022, age 66, Michelle was ready to retire, and together they discussed the fact that they now had $900,000 either invested or in the bank, and each were receiving a government pension, which collectively added up to around $50,000 a year. So really and remarkably, they had done it. They had more than done it, really. They had hit financial independence, and they could easily sell a little slice of their investments to cover the gap between what they earned from their pensions and what they actually spent. So what was the gap? Well, by now they knew their numbers. They spend $20,000 per quarter or $80,000 per year. They had a shortfall of approximately $30,000, which could be harvested from their investments if and when needed. But they are not done with tinkering with their investments, which is entirely normal. And in 2022, Maria spied the foundation series of funds now offered by InvestNow. And these were the types of funds she knew were offered in America, but harder to find here. So she thought, okay, I need to make my own financial independence plan. I need to create a strategy, write it down, and then move some stuff around and action it. She channeled Mary Holm, just do it. She wrote up a 2-year strategy for getting their money in the right place, meaning that she was going to do it just slowly. Moving $100,000 made her nervous, and she would far rather take her time than jump and do it wrong. It's just so much money. So to get it all in the right place, it took her a while. Now, another reason for the caution was that being an American citizen, she still has to declare her income in New Zealand and the US, and she had to figure out the tax liability of her moving money around. Now, being a US expat, no matter where in the world you choose to live, offers up challenges in terms of investing. Now, I've spoken with a lot of Americans who live in New Zealand, and their tax system ain't no joke. Getting it wrong has consequences, and she has to file an annual tax return, and it's an incredibly complicated process that seems never-ending. And incredibly, she has been managing it herself the whole way through. But if you are a US citizen living in New Zealand, a key contact that I'm more than happy to share with you is the blog Grumpus Maximus. He is retired military. He retired young and has written extensively about that. But given he moved his family here a number of years ago, he has also become extremely knowledgeable about keeping the IRS and the IRD happy while living here in New Zealand. So look him up if you need to. She finally got all their money roughly where she wanted it for now. Managing your cash and investments is a moving target as you age. And as you learn and discover more about investing, change will happen. For example, when she learned about Simplicity offering mortgages, she began to question this investment and is uncertain about the direction that they are taking, but will keep an ear open. The long list of ESG and ethical investing options also got her thinking that it's a very fraught argument because her ethics might be different to others, and how could they possibly create a product to keep all the people happy all the time, and who gets to decide what is good and what is bad? These questions are quite interesting to ponder, and they're ongoing, and Maria and I had a perfectly enjoyable conversation about it. Both of us were just pleased to find that we were equally curious and willing to chat. Now, over time, Maria and Michelle have settled on their own mix of conservative, balanced, and growth assets that range from money in the bank through to money in a total world fund. Now, this is the rough breakdown. They've got about $250,000 in cash and term deposits, $180,000 in conservative funds with Simplicity, and half of Michelle's UniSaver retirement account. They've got $400,000 in what she calls balanced things. The other half of Michelle's UniSaver is in a balanced fund. And Michelle also has KiwiSaver in a Milford actively managed balanced fund. And they have $175,000 and invest now in the Foundation Series Total World Fund and their US 500 fund. And these are the growth assets that she mentioned. When Michelle retired in 2022, they had $900,000 spread across these investments and cash. But with compounding and share market growth, despite them now both being retired and spending some of their savings, because the bulk of their money is invested, it continues to grow. So for those good at math, this all adds up to $1 million as of late 2024. And despite them now being fully retired and actually spending their money to cover the difference between income and expenditure, their investments have grown by $100,000. She used to add up the numbers thinking this can't be right, but it is. Maria said to me she feels like this figure is enough to give them options in their retirement. But here is the thing I know to be true. Although they have quite a mix of investments going on, if you do invest your money into share market assets, you reach a tipping point where they start to grow and compound all on their own. Share markets are rocky for sure, but over time they go up. And because even though they are both retired now, they have not even had to sell any of the investments, using the cash in the bank instead, so their balance has grown and it will continue to do so. So now comes the big dilemma for Maria and Michelle and others just like them. After a slow start in their 50s, they got their head around money and they got there in the end, spending a hectic decade making up for lost time so that they could accumulate enough assets to provide them an income to live comfortably for the rest of their lives. But now 69 and 71, their ability to make money from work is gone. That door has closed. They now rely solely on 2 pensions and their investments. Their mantra for a solid decade had been accumulate, accumulate, accumulate. And doing so has not caused them any harm. Steadily investing a portion of their paycheck left them plenty to enjoy the day-to-day of life too. In fact, I got the feeling that because they love each other and they get on so well, they want for little and are happy and content with what they have, which is brilliant. I'm pleased to hear that they didn't live a life of deprivation to save enough to retire. But because they are content, turning around and starting to spend that money, the decumulation phase, that is spending their investments and feeling comfortable watching the balance drop, well, it's a whole other ballgame. So now Maria and Michelle are trying to work out how to switch from saving to taking. They realize they have enough money now. She is learning about various scenarios and rules so that you can safely spend down your money, but she is also a bit of a cheapskate and a bit reluctant to part with it. Every December they sit down and they do an annual plan for things that they want to do and things they want to spend money on. So that will be the time to really think about the things they want to do on their house and how much they might cost. Might they travel, I asked? Well, maybe another trip or 2 back to the States to visit family, but otherwise they like exploring closer to home. They have started to be generous towards charities they support, which is rewarding. But while Maria's car is 30 years old, it still works perfectly fine, so they don't feel the need to spend money on that. And in fact, when she said to Michelle recently, "Let's spend, what do we want?" there was just silence from the two of them. A further thing to play on their mind is that they need to make a plan for what to do with any remaining money when they are both gone. If you ever thought that having money would solve all your problems, while in many ways it solves a large number of them, new ones do crop up that you need to think about. And that was where we got to as we wound up our really interesting chat. They created a goal, they achieved it, and now is the time to make some new ones. And me being me, I had some ideas for them to ponder. They taught themselves to pay off debt. They taught themselves to set aside a portion of every paycheck and invest it. And they now need to teach themselves how to spend and enjoy money. And my suggestion is pretty simple, and I know it works because I've done it many times. You just spend a month saying yes to stuff. You look in the newspaper, you read local notice boards, you sign up to national and international event websites and cultural, academic, music and artistic venues, and you start going to them. COVID made them retreat more than they would have liked, she said, and going out was harder, so they got used to not going out. But more recently, Maria did visit a gallery, and not only that, she bought a piece of art, which is now displayed at home, and every time she walks past it, I'm sure it makes her smile because she enjoys the look of it and the memory of the experience she had to get it. So do more of that kind of stuff was my advice. And another trick is to have a bank account with money in it specifically for having a great time. Put a time frame on that account and pinky promise each other that although you don't yet know how you will be enjoying that money, by X day, it will have been spent. And then they will have the memories to go with it. And I really encourage them to get out there because they are not going to run out of money. They are going to run out of time. And we also talked about health, diet, and aging, but these two are all over that, with close attention being paid to both nutrition and exercise as part of their everyday lives. So they are set up for a great retirement in every way. They love their home and they plan to live out their days there. And we talked about using their money to pay someone to do the jobs that they don't want to do or one day can no longer physically do. And then they can also pay others to come into their home and assist and care for them if needed. So basically, Maria said, they both sit down on a Friday night with a glass of wine and crackers and cheese and think how good their life is, which I just love. Now, before I wrap up, I have just another quick message from today's sponsor. If your finances are holding you back from living the life you want, try Pocketsmith out. They've got the tools to help you make money management easier. And have we got a deal for you? Happy Saver listeners get a whopping 50% off your first 2 months of Pocketsmith's foundation plan. To get your deal, go to pocketsmith.com/The Happy Saver. That's pocketsmith.com/The Happy Saver. Now, I was surprised at the very end of our long and enjoyable correro when Maria said that she is actually an extremely private introvert. But something had clearly lit a fire in her on that particular day, as I think we could have easily talked for another hour. I actually don't think that people don't want to talk about money. They just have not found the right person to talk about it with. Maria and I just seemed to click and conversation came easily. So I encourage you to go out and find that person. And how did I connect with Maria? Well, she sent me a very brief email and it made me curious. So I went back to her with a couple of questions. So be curious about other people and ask what you can do for them, not what they can do for you, as it will always lead you somewhere interesting. Now, Maria and Michelle should give every other late starter huge hope. They really didn't start to fully focus on their money until they were about 53 and 51. But at that point, they had taken on a mortgage and had a student loan to get rid of too. So although now paying attention, at 53 and 51, they still had a mountain to climb. Once debt-free, it was all hands on deck to invest. Regular contributions to their retirement funds, both KiwiSaver and the UniSaver fund, gave them a good head start on investing and a direction to head in once the debt was out of the picture. But Maria said there were some key things that she attributed to their success and she wanted to share them with you. She said, focus on paying attention to your situation. You just can't ignore it. She ignored it for many decades, but when she finally got focused, she was unstoppable. You have to have common goals with your partner because you are both moving with each other, not against each other. Maria is the money person in their partnership, but even though her eyes might glaze over, Michelle was listening, she was in agreement, and they were acting as a team. Self-education is the key, she said. Maria's financial education journey was a haphazard path, but it all helped, and each time she drew a blank, she kept looking. So don't stop looking until you find the answers to your questions. In particular, she referenced literature from the Retirement Commission that details how much you may spend and therefore how much you might need. They are not absolute, but those figures help answer the question of, do I have enough? And if you hear about money seminars offered by companies, go to them because they provide useful information and insights. But just to add my 2 cents to this though, be very selective. There is a wide variety of seminars that are just flogging their overpriced investment products, so be careful. You get to decide what advice to take and not what to take, she said. And the biggest key to her success, she said, was to recognise when she was procrastinating. And Mary Holm helped her realise that even though you don't know all the answers, you should still just do something. And she showed that it is never too late to start. Whatever age you are, and whether you come from humble or privileged beginnings, if you make a start today, you will improve your financial situation, either by a little, or in the case of these two amazing women, a whole darn lot. Over their lifetime, they invested money and time in their educations, and that eventually led them both into well-paying careers. And it was this money that they used to completely pivot their financial situation. So university or education in general is not just for 18-year-olds. If you see an opportunity to increase your skill base because you know it will give you a leap in income, explore that option. Now, any financial advisor listening to this will no doubt have questions about their asset allocation or fund choice, but what I took from it is that an imperfect plan is a plan nonetheless. Maria tried to seek some decent advice, but came up well short because the investment advice industry here in New Zealand fails a lot of people. So she struck out on her own and she created her own financial plan. And you can't argue with it because they now have $1 million when less than 20 years ago they had close to zero. And that comes back to procrastination. Don't sit there thinking you have to learn about money in its entirety and then make a start. Don't think, I'll just wait until X, Y, or Z before I do something. There is no such thing as a perfect financial plan. No two are ever the same. The learning never stops, so just start now and learn on the job. So all that is left to say is a huge thank you to Maria and Michelle for being so generous with your time and your information. And now you two, just get out there and enjoy yourselves. So that is all from me this week. Another short episode, haha. I can't help it that people I chat to are just so darn interesting. If you want to get in touch, you know you can find me at thehappysaver.com. And please do share my podcast and my blog with your friends. It is still the best way that I can help other people learn something new about money. And finally, I would love it if you would talk more about money with your own friends and whānau and help me continue to help others be better with money. So until next time, happy saving.